Whoa, what is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Would have had this video up yesterday, but I was out late last night and had work today, so figured I would drop a video today talking about the differences between our former defensive coordinator and our new defensive coordinator with Shane Bowen and what hopefully he will bring to this New York Giants football team. And they are complete polar opposites in terms of their defensive philosophy, and we'll jump into it throughout the entirety of this video when it comes to Wink and when it comes to your new defensive coordinator, Shane Bowen. By all accounts, he was the Giants' third choice. So obviously, as a Giants fan, you don't like hearing that. You're not going to get super excited about that. We missed out on our first two guys, and we ended up going with him. But when you really sit back and you look at it, you say to yourself, well, it's not that bad of a move, or at least on paper, could be a good move for the New York Giants. I don't think it's a move that's going to, draw extreme excitement. It's not like a Vic Fangio signing, for example, who, of course, is a widely credited defensive coordinator throughout the course of his career. Bowen's still very young. He's 37 years old. But of all the candidates that the New York Giants were potentially looking into, he was the only one, at least to my knowledge, that had any experience in terms of being a defensive coordinator. Of course, he was the defensive coordinator with the Tennessee Titans each of the last 3 years. And we'll talk about some of the things that he did well there, some of the things that maybe you'll be concerned about a bit if you're a New York Giants fan. In addition to this today, the Giants actually brought in a new tight ends coach, Tim Kelly, who, of course, is coming over from Tennessee as well, who was the offensive coordinator there, I believe, for a few years. So they pick up two guys from the Titans. In terms of where Bowen came from, who, of course, this is where the video is going to, be based off of. We're not going to talk too much about the tight ends coach. But in terms of where he came from, this is, these are his credentials. The parts that I'm going to hit with are Ohio State in 2012. The reason being, Vrabel coached with him there at the same exact time. He then became a defensive assistant with the Houston Texans, where once again Mike Vrabel was there. And to no surprise, when Mike Vrabel took over as the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, guess who joined him? Mr. Bowen with the Titans. He started as an outside linebacker coach from 2018 to 2020, then took over as the defensive coordinator each of the last 3 years before being appointed to becoming the New York Giants defensive coordinator now, in what you would call a lateral move. Of course, the Titans are cleaning things out now that they fired Mike Vrabel, so the Giants were able to leap on him and grab a guy that has done a relatively decent job. I'm not going to say he's been extraordinary, but a pretty solid job with the Titans when you factor everything in that I'll talk about throughout this video. But it clearly shows that Vrabel thought highly of him. I believe in 2021, he didn't start, if I'm not mistaken, as the DC. I think they went into the year without a quote-unquote DC, with Vrabel, of course, potentially calling the plays. But then midway through the season or later into the season, they made the transition and Bowen took over. And there's some good and there's some bad. And the thing that you really hear about him when you go on message boards, when you go on Twitter, when you see what people have said about him in terms of people from the Tennessee Titans fan base, bend but don't break. That's what you hear time and time and time again, which is interesting because that is completely different than Wink Martindale. What Wink brought to the New York Giants was there was no bend. It was do or die. It was live or die by the sword. We're going to blitz the hell out of you. And if we don't get home, we're probably going to give up big plays. And we'll talk about that throughout this video, the differences between the two defensive philosophies. When you look at what Bowen brings to the table, it is eerily similar to that of Patrick Graham, who, of course, was a defensive coordinator with Joe Judge, who I actually thought did a pretty good job. I know Giants fans weren't excited about him. He didn't blitz a lot. It wasn't the most exciting defense, but I actually thought he did a relatively good job as the New York Giants defensive coordinator. I remember after his first year, we were all very excited when he was brought back. And Dable, if you remember, actually thought pretty highly of Patrick Graham. His first year when he took over as the head coach of the New York Giants, all reports had come out before we hired Wink that they wanted to retain Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham, of course, didn't like probably the way that they handled Judge. You heard reports that he didn't like the whispers of the Brian Flores situation with the New York Giants, and he parted ways with the Giants and then went over to the Raiders. But when you look at the blitz frequency, the style of defense that he ran, I think you're getting a defensive coordinator here in Bowen who is much more like-minded to a guy like a Patrick Graham than to a guy like a Wink Martindale. So if you're a fan of a team that goes balls to the wall and blitzes nearly every play, don't expect that here. When you really look at the blitz numbers year over year, it is insane. This past year, the New York Giants blitzed over 45% of the time. They ranked second in the National Football League in that category in terms of blitz frequency. The year before, I think they were either second or first as well. This past year, the Giants blitzed in terms of total plays 288 times. To put that in context, under Bowen, the last 2 years with the Tennessee Titans, when you tally up both years, 2022 and 2023, the Tennessee Titans blitzed 276 times, which is 12 times less than what the Giants blitzed alone just this year. The Titans this year blitzed 143 times, or 22% of the time, which was less than half of the amount of times in terms of blitz frequency that the New York Giants blitzed. Despite that, the Titans actually had 12 more sacks than the New York Giants did, and they generated at least close to the amount of pressures. It's fairly comparable. 122 pressures for the Titans, 133 pressures for the Giants. When you factor in how much more often the Giants blitzed, you would think that difference would be significantly higher. It was not. Another thing that really stood out to me on the stat sheet that I thought was interesting was the yards after catch. Of course, when you run a defense like Wink Martindale's, it opens itself up to big plays and plays after the catch. If you're blitzing more guys, there's less guys in coverage to be able to make a tackle. This past year, the New York Giants surrendered 2,306 yards after the catch. The Titans, by comparison, only surrendered 1,820. So about 500 less yards after the catch this past year, which ranked sixth best in the league. The Giants, however, ranked near bottom of the league there with that 2,306 number. I think they were the third or fourth worst number in that category. So that's the difference here. You're getting a team that is going to take a lot less risk defensively, and they're going to give up a lot fewer big plays because of it. They're also probably going to make fewer plays in terms of turnovers created, right? This past year, that was the biggest strength with Wink Martindale, albeit the year before, it was actually rather disappointing when we only had 6 interceptions all year, which was the total for the Titans this year. They only created 6 interceptions. This year, the Giants actually created 31 turnovers, which was the biggest reason why this defense did okay, I think you could say, when you really look at the final numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, we ranked 26th and 27th in yards against and points against, albeit not with a lot of help from the offense. But you could say the same thing about the Tennessee Titans, who had an offense that ranked damn near bottom of the league, much like the New York Giants, yet their defense was kind of middle of the pack. They ranked 18th in yards against and 16th in points against, despite the fact they didn't get a whole lot of help from their offensive side of the ball. So, there's things you can point to that you like with Wink. There's things that you can point to that you like with Bowen. I think what is as clear as day is the Giants are taking a completely different route in terms of their defensive strategy this year. In terms of the schemes, like a lot of times when the Giants or any team hires a defensive coordinator, the first thing you want to know is, do they run a 3-4? Do they run a 4-3? My answer to that all the time, by the way, I got this from Doug Analytics, who does a great job in terms of breaking down statistics on Twitter. My answer to that almost always is there's really no such thing as a defined defense in today's day and age. There's a lot of teams that are going to run so many different defensive fronts, and the same thing applied to the Tennessee Titans this past year. They had 310 snaps in a 3-3-5, which is 3 linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 DBs. They had 252 snaps in a 2-4-5, 173 snaps in a 2-3-6. The traditional 4-3-4, they only ran 10% of the time, 95 snaps. The traditional 3-4-4, they only ran 6% of the time, or 57 snaps. And then they had 1-4-6, they actually ran 4% of the time, where they only had 1 defensive lineman and 6 DBs with 4 linebackers out on the field at once. Like I said, they ran 35 times, or 4%. But when you look at the amount of formations where they had at least 5 DBs plus, so that would be the 3-3-5, the 2-4-5, the 2-3-6, and the 1-4-6. When you tally that up, that equates to 82% of the time they had at least 5 DBs out there at once and less than 4 D linemen. So expect to see a lot of DBs out on the field, which we kind of saw with Wink Martindale, but of course they're going to utilize them a lot differently. But that's this, I guess that's the disparity. I thought that was interesting information that you would expect to use from the Tennessee Titans. In terms of other interesting tidbits, I mean, the one stat that everybody talked about where the Titans excelled this past year, no coincidence, same thing you could say for Patrick Graham his first year with the New York Giants, was the red zone defense. The Titans this year only surrendered a touchdown on 37.7% of their opponent's trips into the red zone. Under Patrick Graham, I don't know what the percentage was, but we ranked second. The Titans this past year ranked first. By comparison, the New York Giants were awful in that category. So that was a big strength of the Titans. That was a big strength of the Titans basically since Bowen's been the DC. I think they were 15th the year before, but the year before that, I think they were 5th. So they've been really strong in that category. a bend but don't break defense. Basically, a defense that's going to make you earn your points. They're going to make you drive down the field. You're going to be able to move the ball 20 to 20. But when you get inside the 20, they're going to hold strong more often than not. So that's a big plus, in my opinion, since he was the defensive coordinator with the Titans. The other thing that you could point to that is a big plus, that was a big negative with Wink Martindale, is the run defense. Same thing with Patrick Graham. We were really good against the run with Patrick Graham. With Wink, we were awful. We ranked second to last both years in terms of yards per carry against when Wink Martindale was the defensive coordinator with the New York Giants. We surrendered 5.2 yards per carry his first year, and we surrendered 4.7 this past year, which once again ranked 31st in the league. The Titans this year only surrendered 3.8 yards per carry, which ranked fourth best in the NFL. And in 2022, they only gave up 3.4 yards per carry, which ranked first in the NFL. Now, of course, both teams are going to have different players, different talent level, but I think the Giants are fairly similar in terms of the way that their defense is built. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence, Simmons, similar player, right? Strong interior defensive lineman. I think obviously you have to think the Giants are going to curtail their defense to have a similar player personnel to that of what the Tennessee Titans did. And a lot of people will point to the fact that the Titans were not good against the pass, and they were not. They had the third worst completion percentage in the NFL, 67.8% this past year. So almost 68% of the balls that were thrown against their defense were completed. And I think that goes back to the bend but don't break. We're not going to give up huge plays after the catch, but we're going to give up catches. We're going to let you move the ball 20 to 20, and we're going to hold strong when you get inside the 20-yard line. They were 15th in yards against through the air, where the Giants were actually 14th. They gave up more passing yards, despite the fact that the Titans gave up a lot more completions, because we go back again to that yards after the catch stat. That was almost a 500-yard discrepancy. So that's what I expect here with this defensive coordinator here with Bowen. I think it's going to be a defense that may not win you games, like we saw at times with Wink Martindale, where we created 3 or 4 turnovers against weaker offenses, weaker quarterbacks. But I think it's also a defense that's not going to lose you a whole lot of football games. I thought Wink was a pretty good defensive coordinator. I wanted him back. It was fun. It was exciting. But do I think Bowen could be just as good, if not better? Absolutely. He's young. He has experience, and he has some results. His first year with the Titans, they ranked 6th in points against, 12th in yards against. I think he could be a good defensive coordinator. It may be a boring hire. You may not be super excited about it, but I think he has at least potential to be, at a bare minimum, an average defensive coordinator. Is it going to be a guy that you're going to be pumped up to see the defense week to week? Probably not. Expect to see the Giants surrender a lot of drives, 20 to 20, and then try to hold strong and hold teams to field goals. But I do think this defensive philosophy, especially with a defense that is not nearly as talented as some of the elite upper echelon defenses in the league, like the 49ers, like the Chiefs, so on and so forth, this is probably the better approach to take when you're going up against better quarterbacks. Gone are the days, I think, where you're going to see Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, have 660 total yards or whatever it was, where the Giants live and die by the sword. Wink's defensive philosophy is probably much better when you're going up against a weaker quarterback, and you could take advantage like we did when we versed the Patriots and the Jets and so on and so forth. But I do think this philosophy is probably better when you're going up against better quarterbacks and better offenses. Either way, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how well the offense, in my opinion, does next year if this team is going to surprise. I think the defense will be solid. I think they'll be okay. I'm not too concerned with Bowen coming in, but we'll see some of the adjustments that he makes. Does he want a guy like Isaiah Simmons in this defense? We'll see. Those will be some of the decisions that he has to make. The same with a guy like Xavier McKinney. When you look at the weakness with the Titans last year and why they did not do well against the pass, some of that could certainly be pointed due to the fact that their secondary just was not very good. There was not a lot of talent there. The Giants have some potential, but still a lot of unproven potential in that secondary, especially if you were to lose a player like McKinney. So I expect to see the Giants mold their defense a lot similar to the way that Mike Vrabel did with the Tennessee Titans now that they bring Bowen aboard. They retained all their other defense, Henderson, Patterson, which is good, and we'll see how they work together here with Bowen. But I'm excited to see how it works out next year. I'm glad that we finally have a defensive coordinator so the Giants could start to plan accordingly for the draft and free agency for the players that they want to bring in to fit this defense. So Shane Bowen is the New York Giants defensive coordinator going into 2024. So that was the main, domino for this coaching staff. Well, now you know. Free agency, not too far away. It's about a month and a half away, so there'll be plenty of rumors to talk about. But wanted to get my video and my opinion out on the new defensive coordinator for the New York Giants. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.